My husband, who's been on an overseas business assignment, was coming back temporarily, so we decided to have a family dinner at our son's house where we live together. We were having a pleasant conversation, but the mood suddenly changed when my grandson David said something unexpected. "So today isn't a punishment day for Grandma? She can eat dinner too, right?" I was trying so hard to keep things together, but I never imagined my grandson's innocent words would ruin everything. My mind went blank, and all I could do was look down in silence. My son and his wife tried to cover it up, but the more they talked, the more David blurted out the truth. A flustered Susan finally. "Just be quiet for a minute," she yelled at David, making him cry. Then, "Stop yelling at David." My husband, John, raised his voice, and the pleasant dinner gathering turned tense in an instant. In the now silent dining room, with only David's sobs echoing, John demanded an explanation from Ken. During this tense situation, I held David close, trying to comfort him. David, in my arms, said, "I'm sorry, Grandma. Did I get you in trouble again?" He was worried. What should I do now? All I could do was hold David close and remain silent. I'm Karen Smith, a housewife in my 60s. My husband John and I started our love story at work. Back in the day, it was tough, so I decided to leave the company after we got married. Back then, without smartphones, exchanging messages were totally different, and office romances were usually kept in secret. So, until we got engaged, I was always nervous that our boss might find out. Even after we got engaged, I stressed over seating arrangements and who should give speeches at our wedding, to the point where I didn't know who the wedding was really for. On top of that, if I messed up even a little, John, who stayed at the company, might get unpleasant remarks, so I couldn't let my guard down for even a second. But going through all that made our bond stronger, even now. I realized this when John's overseas business assignment was announced, and we had no choice than to live apart. 3 months before his departure. "I think I'll be back in less than 3 years, but I'm worried. I think it would be better if you'll come with me? I appreciate the thought, but at my age, moving abroad is just too much. Unlike you, I can only speak English." John was always worried about leaving me alone in the States. Besides, Ken and his family are here if anything happens, and we can always call, so don't worry too much. "Yeah, you're right. Ken is our only son. 14 years ago, Ken started college and he wanted to live on his own and moved out. After Ken's graduation, he got work and met Susan at the same company, and after 7 years they got married. 2 years after they got married, our grandson David was born. Ken hardly visited home when he was single, but after David was born, he started visiting us regularly. Both John and I always look forward to seeing Ken and his family. All in all, our time together as a couple has also been peaceful and enjoyable. What made me especially happy was that John would plan trips for us whenever he had a long weekend. I've been so busy with work all these years, leaving everything at home to you. From now on, let's spend more time together." With those words, he always takes me wherever I wanted to go. For us, this is going to be our first experience with a long-distance setup. And with it being overseas, coming back home wouldn't be easy. It's no wonder John was worried. But if anything happens, our son and his wife, who live just 15 minutes from the nearest bus stop, can help out. So, I kept telling John not to worry. About a month and a half before his departure, I hurt my back and needed to have multiple checkups in the hospital. It was what they call a slipped disc. Fortunately, the symptoms were mild, so I could manage getting to the hospital on my own and maintain my daily routine. However, to John, who was about to leave the country, it seemed like a big deal, and he said he would delay his departure until my back got better. I appreciate the thought, but it's not serious enough to delay your work. But you can't live alone like this. What if something happens? I kept trying to convince him, "Don't worry," but John wouldn't budge, saying, "I don't want anything to happen." The discussion went nowhere, and a few days passed. "We're both grown-ups, don't worry about something like this. If anything happens, Ken and his family can give me the assistance." I kept trying to reassure my still worried husband that day. Then, suddenly, John had an idea and murmured. Ken. Right, let's ask if you can stay with Ken and his family. What? John immediately called Ken and told him about my back injury and his upcoming departure. After hearing the story, Ken. I understand the situation. Let me talk to Susan, and can you hold on for a bit? He said, then hung up the phone. I thought to myself, there's no way they'd agree to our request of me suddenly moving in together with them. But Ken's response was the complete opposite of what I expected. Susan's on board too. It's only 3 years at most, right? She said she doesn't mind at all. I see, that's a relief. I'll need to thank Susan properly soon. Ken, I'm counting on you to take care of your mom. And so, I was persuaded by my husband, and it was decided that I'd move in with Ken and his family. My daughter-in-law, Susan, used to work as a chef in the same company cafeteria as Ken. A year ago, she fulfilled her dream of opening a diner, and now both Ken and Susan work hard together after Ken quits his job. I'm sorry for imposing on you when you've just started the business and are so busy. A few days after we decided to move in, my husband and I had dinner with our son's family. While John and Ken were chatting over drinks, I quietly took the opportunity to apologize to Susan. I thought it must be a burden for Susan to take in her mother-in-law with a bad back for 3 years during such a crucial time for their new business. But Susan. Please don't worry about it. We help each other out when in need. And, when you're feeling better, could you occasionally help look after David? She asked. We usually bring him to daycare, but in the evenings and nights, he's often alone. Seeing Susan speak with such concern, I realized why she agreed to us living together. She probably wanted me to help take care of our grandson. Of course. If there's anything I can do, just let me know, no need to hesitate. When I replied with a smile, Susan also smiled, looking relieved. I was truly relieved at that moment, glad that I wasn't going to be just a burden. Living with Ken's family turned out to be more peaceful and comfortable than I had expected. I was already grateful that they welcomed me into their home, but they even prepared a room just for me since they have a guest room. Wanting to contribute to Ken's family, I took the initiative to do the laundry, wash dishes, and pick up David from daycare. I also started cooking dinner in place of Susan, who often stayed late prepping for the next day. Ken and Susan always expressed their gratitude, and I got to spend plenty of time with my adorable grandson. Even though living together was a last-minute resort on John's request, I was genuinely happy at that time and spent each day feeling grateful to both him and my son's family. However, this happiness didn't last very long. It all started with a casual comment my grandson David made during dinner. I like Grandma's cooking better than Mom's. Oh my, thank you. There's no way my simple home cooking could beat a professional's, but maybe my home-style meals felt fresh and tasty to David, whose parents run a diner. David went on proudly, saying, I can even eat vegetables, I don't like it when Mom cooks them. I praised him, saying, that's great, and gave him plenty of compliments. To be honest, David's likes and dislikes were just like Ken's when he was a child. So I just made the dishes Ken used to like, and it just so happened that David liked them too. However, this seemed to strike a nerve with Susan. If you like Grandma's cooking so much, maybe she should cook all your meals from now on? Susan's expression was calm, but her tone was clearly annoyed. Both Ken and I sensed it was best not to say anything, so we continued eating in silence. But 5-year-old David didn't notice any of this. Really? Yay! Grandma's food every day. He exclaimed with joy. Seeing David's reaction only made Susan more upset. And from that point on, I ended up cooking all the meals for Ken's family. I was originally a housewife, so cooking wasn't a burden at all. The problem was that as David and Ken enjoyed my cooking, Susan's gaze became sharper, almost like she was glaring at me all the time. On top of that, David started asking me for everything. Bath time, reading stories, getting dressed, drawing, putting him to bed, he'd call for me for everything. I happily obliged, thinking it was for my dear grandson, but perhaps Susan felt like I was taking her place in her family, especially with David. Mom, please stop spoiling David. Honestly, this is why older people are so frustrating. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll be more careful. Before I knew it, Susan's attitude toward me had turned cold and filled with resentment. About 4 months after my husband left for overseas, Susan came to me with a proposal. Starting today, you'll be doing all the housework in lieu of rent. When I asked why the sudden change, Susan explained that providing food and utilities for an extra adult for 3 years without compensation will hurt their finances. And she wanted me to pay for that loss through labor. Your back is better now, right? Then from now on, I expect you to work hard. I was speechless as Susan spoke in that cold, detached manner. Is this really the same Susan I once knew? She seemed like a completely different person from before we started living together, and though I felt a deep sense of fear, I decided to comply silently. Besides, the fact was, our living expenses had increased with one more adult in the house. As per the household budget, I understand her feelings of wanting me to make up for it by doing the housework. I thought I should be more considerate of Susan and try to lessen her burden. If I did that, Susan would be warmer towards me and things might go back to how they were before. At that time, I truly believed that if I put in the effort, our relationship could return to normal. However, that hope I had was just wishful thinking. If I folded the laundry, she would scold me for doing it poorly. If I do the dishes, she would criticize my process. When David sought my affection, she would sneer, saying I was bribing him with food to get him on her side. No matter how hard I tried to be considerate, everything seemed to anger Susan. Still, I continued to work hard around the house, thinking of my son's married life. The only solace I found was in the meals. David and Ken would say they are delicious and eat everything, making me feel a bit relieved. But even that soon became a trigger for Susan. What's so great about this old-fashioned home cooking? It tastes awful, and it's so bland and unappetizing. After saying that, Susan goes to the kitchen, cooks a meal for herself, and eats alone. The atmosphere at the table is cold and tense, as if we all had seen a ghost. I was so scared of what cruel words might come next that I couldn't continue eating, and even David, sensing the cold tension, lost his appetite and left his food unfinished. As we all finished the meal in silence and I stood up to clear the dishes, the next moment. Mother, sit down for a moment. Susan stopped me with a cold, low voice. I sat back down, already feeling disheartened, expecting to be scolded. When I cautiously looked at Susan's face, she was glaring at me with an even harsher expression than usual. I'm a professional. When I cook, it costs money. Do you understand? Yes. I understand, I replied, barely getting the words out. I forced myself to respond. Since you made me cook outside of work, you need to be taught a lesson. What Susan said sent a chill down my spine. I was already feeling mentally stressed. What more could she do to me? My fingers were cold and numb, yet I felt a clammy sweat in my palms as I waited for Susan's next words. Susan twisted her mouth into a smirk. No meals for you tomorrow. Then she left the living room. I was momentarily taken aback by the lack of insults or harsh words. Was that it? It was the first time it had ended so lightly, which only made it more frightening. The next day, when I truly experienced a day without a single meal, I quickly realized the terror of this punishment. No matter how hungry I became or how close I was to collapsing, I wasn't allowed to stop doing housework. On top of that, I still had to prepare meals for Ken's family, with my stomach growling the whole time. If I was asked to run errands, I felt like I might collapse from hunger on the way. At that point, I even thought being yelled at inside the house would have been better. This kind of punishment happened about twice a week. Ken, who I hoped would help me, was too busy trying to stay on Susan's good side to be of any help. Worse yet, lately Ken started joining Susan in berating and overworking me. My only solace was my grandson, David, but if Susan catches him being kind to me, she would scold him too. So, I had no choice but to limit my interactions with him to the bare minimum. The room they had set aside for me became little more than a storage space, and now I can't even stretch properly while I sleep. Before I knew it, I had become less than just a burden. I thought many times about just going back to my family home if I had to endure such harsh treatment. But each time, the thought of how worried my husband would be working overseas held me back. At most, it would be 3 years. If I could just endure it, everything would work out in the end. I continued to live each day like an empty shell, terrified of triggering Susan's anger like stepping on a landmine. Then, one day, a little over a year after my husband left for his overseas assignment. "Hey, Ken. It's sudden, but I'll be coming back to the States next week. How about we all go out for a meal?" "Next week? That's really on short notice. How about we have dinner at home instead?"
Yeah.
"That sounds good. By the way, how's your mom? Every time I call, I'm told she's playing with David, so we never get to talk." "Oh,
Yeah.
she's fine. We'll see you next week then." With that, Ken abruptly ended the call. Then, during dinner, he told Susan and me about it. Susan looked obviously annoyed, but inside, I was thrilled. Ever since he left for overseas, my husband had only called during the first few months. I figured he was too busy to call, but honestly, I felt very lonely. Plus, Susan had forbidden me from calling him, so all I could do was wait for his calls. What if he had gotten hurt or sick while he was abroad? What if he was exhausted from overworking? Next week, I would finally be able to check on all my accumulated worries about him. I felt like I was coming back to life after so long. But when Susan saw how happy I was, for some reason, she got extremely angry. "What's with that happy face? You're making it seem like I'm the bad guy." "Huh? What's wrong all of a sudden?" "No one's saying that." "Shut up. Don't talk back. You're getting punished today too." Not understanding why, I wasn't given any food that day either. In the week leading up to my husband's return, I was not only tasked with housework but also forced to help with the store's prep work, plus handed a lot of flyers, being told, "Don't come back until you've handed them all out." The treatment was harsher than ever, and I was on the verge of collapsing every day. What have I done to upset her this time? I tried to figure out what new trigger I might have hit, but I couldn't think of anything, maybe because of the exhaustion and hunger. I spent my days more carefully than ever, constantly watching Susan's mood. Finally, the day of the dinner with my husband arrived. To welcome my husband after so long, I made a mountain of his favorite dishes and greeted him at the door. "Karen, I've missed you. You've lost some weight, haven't you? You don't look so well." "No, that's not true. But you must be exhausted." His sharp observation startled me. The week leading up to his return had been filled with punishments and an extreme increase in chores and labor, and I was on the verge of collapsing. But I didn't want him to worry, so I desperately tried to hide how unwell I was. Despite my efforts, my husband noticed something was off and asked another question. "I've been calling you regularly, but you're always unavailable. Did something happen here?" "Huh? Regularly? Since when?" "Since I went overseas, I've been calling at least twice or thrice a week. But they always tell me you're too busy to talk." I had no idea my husband had been calling so often. As I stood there in shock, Ken and Susan appeared from the back of the house. They greeted my husband with smiles and led him straight to the living room. There, David, who had been waiting in the living room, happily jumped into his grandpa's arms. My husband was overjoyed to reunite with his grandson after more than a year. The heartwarming scene made me momentarily forget our conversation at the door. And just like that, Susan called everyone to start the dinner. As everyone sat at the table in a joyful atmosphere, I stood a little apart, as was my habit. When Susan noticed this, she, "Mother, what are you doing? Please sit down quickly," Susan called out to me in a flustered tone. I snapped out of it and hurriedly sat down in a chair. My husband observed this with a suspicious look. I thought that if I make any more mistakes, I might be severely punished later. With that in mind, I decided to stay close to my husband and focus on serving food and drinks. Thanks to this, the rest of the dinner went smoothly, and the atmosphere remained calm. Just as I started to feel relieved that I might get through this, David suddenly murmured as if he had remembered something. "Oh,
Yeah.
today isn't a punishment day for Grandma. She can eat." "I'm so glad." As David smiled brightly, Ken and Susan's faces quickly turned pale. Their hands and shoulders were trembling slightly, and their eyes were darting around. It was clear that something was off, but they both forced smiles and desperately tried to cover up David's comment. But the more they talked, the more David blurted out the truth beside them. Finally, Susan, now panicked. "Just be quiet for a minute." Susan yelled at David, making him cry. Seeing this, my husband. "Stop yelling at David." He raised his voice. The atmosphere at the dinner instantly turned tense and hostile. In the now silent living room, with only David's sobs echoing, my husband, in a voice lower and heavier than I'd ever heard, called out to Ken, demanding an explanation. "I just spoke with your mother, and she said she didn't know about the calls I've been making twice or thrice a week. What's going on here?" "Huh? Well, I mean." Ken was visibly shaken, confronted by such an intimidating tone from his father for the first time in his life. My husband, unsatisfied with Ken's vague response, demanded an explanation even more forcefully. Realizing he couldn't talk his way out of it, Ken ended up confessing everything about how they had been treating me. During this time, I kept holding and comforting David. I knew Susan might scold me again later, but I couldn't just leave my crying grandson alone. In my arms, David. "I'm sorry, Grandma. Are you going to get in trouble again because of me?" he said, worrying about me. As I gently stroked David's head. "Don't worry, David. You haven't done anything wrong." That was all I could say to comfort him. After several minutes, when my husband had heard everything from Ken, he was holding his head in despair. It was only natural that he couldn't believe his own son had conspired with his wife to mistreat his mother. Especially since it was my husband himself who had suggested we all live together. The shock must have been immense. "I trusted both of you. I even asked your mom for help to fund your new business. What on earth were you both thinking?" After thinking it over for a while, my husband demanded that we should end the living arrangement. He also demanded that they immediately return all the living expenses he had been sending for me during our time together. Hearing this, I couldn't help but raise my voice. "Wait, what? Living expenses? What are you talking about? Don't tell me you weren't informed about that either?" Seeing me nod, my husband slumped his shoulders even more and glared at Ken and Susan. According to my husband, when the living arrangement was proposed, he had agreed to send $300 a month for my living expenses. He also mentioned that Ken was supposed to explain this to me later. However, I had no idea that John was sending this amount to Ken monthly. Instead, I am told to work because of the living expenses, and was treated like a housemaid. When my husband heard this, he once again called out to Ken in that low, heavy voice. And then, calmly. "All of it. Return every cent of your startup fund and everything I sent for your mom's living expenses," he declared. Hearing this, Ken and Susan turned pale again and immediately began apologizing to my husband. Susan explained that although the store had been open for about 2 years by this point, they were still struggling because sales hadn't picked up as expected. She admitted that she had taken out her jealousy and frustration on me, seeing how I was peacefully enjoying time with David. Ken, on the other hand, confessed, "We got greedy and wanted to keep the monthly remittances for ourselves." He also revealed that they had blocked my husband's calls to prevent him from finding out how they were treating me and about the remittances. After confessing everything, they acknowledged their wrongdoing and begged my husband for forgiveness, promising to change their ways, but John didn't even react. He took me back to our family home and, during his brief return to the States, recovered all the money he had given to Ken and Susan. Then, just before leaving the country again, he used part of that money to arrange for me to stay at a local hotel. I'll talk to the company and arrange to return overseas soon. The hotel staff will take care of everything for you, so it's gonna be comfortable and safe. Please stay here until I get back." With that, he left for overseas again. I thought staying at my family home would have been enough, but I didn't want to worry him any further, so I didn't argue about my new living arrangement. In reality, life at the hotel was very comfortable, and my mind and body became noticeably healthier. Less than a month later, my husband truly returned overseas. The hotel costs while I waited for him were quite expensive, but John is very pleased to see how much better I looked. Is there anyone else who would care for me this much? Once again, I felt deeply grateful and happy to have met and married him. After we returned home, Ken and Susan began visiting frequently. They repeatedly begged my husband to provide financial assistance again. However, they could never regain the trust they had lost. On top of that, it seemed their customer base had dwindled even further, and they were falling behind on the loan repayments they had taken out to pay back my husband. As a result, their business was set to close after just 2.5 years. With their dreams shattered and their marriage strained, Ken and Susan divorced when the business went under. Susan left, saying she couldn't even see David as cute anymore, and packed up her things to leave. Ken was left to deal with the remaining debt and raising David, but since then, he's turned over a new leaf, found a new job, and is working hard. Wanting to support Ken, I started taking care of David again. Of course, we don't provide any financial support, but on the days Ken works late, we look after David at our house. Before we knew it, David is almost ready for elementary school. Look at this backpack. This part is gold and it's so cool. Thank you, Grandpa and Grandma, for buying it for me. The way he proudly wears his brand new backpack is absolutely adorable, no matter how many times I see it. My husband and I want to continue watching over David with kindness. And I secretly hope that someday, a kind and compassionate wife will come into Ken's life.